Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori. Today I am here to give you my April wrap up. Now, April was actually a pretty slow month for me when it came to reading. I don't know that I was in a reading slump per se, but I was definitely having a harder time kind of digging into the books that I was reading. I did get through 5 books here in April, and I did DNF 1. So one of those that I did finish was a bit chunky, as you'll see, so I feel pretty good still about how much reading I got done in April, and I'm looking forward to May, which if you haven't checked out my May TBR, go check that out because I actually had a TBR for this coming month. It's my birthday month, and I am planning on doing some catch-up reading of books that I've been putting off that I know I'm really gonna love, and I'm really looking forward to it. But April was an interesting month of reading, you guys, because I think I learned some things about myself as a reader in April, and those are always great moments when you can kind of ask yourself some questions about why a book is or is not working for you and find out something new. So the first book that I finished in April was Master of the Void by Wend Raven. This was my 10th and final SPFBO, Self-Published Fantasy Blog Off finalist. I have finally read all 10 of them, and the winner of SPFBO 9, which if you haven't seen it yet, was Murder at Spindle Manor by Morgan Stang. So congratulations to the winner, and congratulations to all the finalists and everybody who put their books in this year. It's amazing to me how fast and also how slow 10 or 11 months goes by when it comes to a competition like this. But huge amount of effort from the judges, and you know what? It's really encouraging, I think, to see how many dedicated indie authors are coming out here and putting out books for us to read, and it's a great way to find new indie authors that may end up being a personal favorite. So I would encourage you all to keep an eye on SPFBO 10 this next year, because I'm sure there will be a lot of amazing gems coming out in this year's competition as well. Back to Master of the Void. So this was a book that follows some younger protagonists. It's a world that has a conflict surrounding elemental magic. There are these different elemental orders of magic, and only certain people that are trained at a university can become mages, essentially. And there's a type of magic that is kind of believed to be an anti-magic, where if you have this, you're considered kind of magic-less, even though that's not true. We meet Darius and Ormond pretty much first thing within the book, and they are kind of on two opposite ends of a class system that basically gets to decide who can and cannot become a mage. And obviously, the more noble you are, the more wealthy your family is, the more likely that you are to get into this prestigious university and become a mage. Life deals both of them a hand that they were not expecting, and their lives both take some unexpected twists. One of the things I really enjoyed about this book is the way that the classes of magic were described and laid out in the book, and it doesn't reinvent the wheel when it comes to elemental magic systems, but I found that it was integrated with the world really well. It was interesting, and I liked the way that it interacted with the characters. Where this book struggled a little bit for me was that it did end up feeling a little bit more young adult in the characterization and the exploration of the world, instead of these young characters being thrown into a world that feels so much bigger than them and this very harsh, gritty adult world. I felt constantly like the world was being made smaller through the perspective of these very young characters, and the focus was very heavily on the relationships between those young characters and kind of the angst of the coming of age that they were going through, which is totally fine. It just wasn't what I was expecting, I guess, going into it. There were also a couple of things in this in terms of plot devices that really threw me out of the immersion and made me kind of frustrated as a reader. Choices that I felt like were a little bit gratuitous. Overall, though, I would definitely say that this book is incredibly bingeable. I was doing the just one more chapter thing every night, so that was one thing that I really enjoyed about it. It was not an obstructive kind of read, which I appreciated, and again, I really liked some of the way that the magic was integrated into the world as a whole. The next book that I finished is The Burial by Drew Montgomery. This is a novella, and this was my first ever review for the Before We Go blog. If I hadn't told you guys yet already, or you didn't know, I was asked to be a reviewer reviewer and team member over on Before We Go blog, which reviews a lot of sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, and a smattering of other things. And I was really grateful to be asked to be a contributor to that blog, so I will do my best to remember to put the link down in the comments so you can read my full review of The Burial there. But essentially what this book is about is it's an exploration of grief from the point of a character that I feel like fantasy and storytelling in general often leaves behind, which is ironic considering the storyline. We meet Ira, who is a wife and mother who's left behind by her husband when he goes off to answer the call of his liege lord to fight in a holy war. And the entire company of men from her village goes off to fight, and it doesn't take long before tragedy befalls them. And the whole story is about Ira's determination to see her husband properly buried and given his last rites. And she faces her own death to put him properly to rest. I really enjoyed this story. I think this is the type of book that oftentimes in fantasy would get overlooked. It doesn't have the same kind of like heart-stopping action and typical tropes that we would see in fantasy novels, but I love the understated poignancy of this book telling the story of a wife and mother who goes on a journey to find not only her husband's body to lay him to rest, but also parts of herself. And it's a really profound exploration of grief that I thought was really beautifully done. There were definitely parts of this story that I didn't love as much in terms of the execution of the plot and some of the other characters besides Ira. There were a few things where dreams were utilized throughout the plot, and the structure of that I think felt a little bit jarring to me. But overall, this is the kind of story that I would love to see more of in fantasy, and I definitely think that for anyone who is looking for something like that, definitely give this one a try. Next up, I finally finished my March Cosmic Footsteps book club read, and that was Forerunner by Andre Norton. Andre Norton is a female writer who wrote under a male pseudonym, and she was known as the grand dame of science fiction and fantasy back in the mid to later 1900s. And Forerunner is a science fiction short book that follows the story of Simsa, who is raised in a culture that is very much not her original one. She is the only person who looks the way she does, and she's kind of caught between two worlds because whoever her people are, she has no awareness of them or where she comes from or who her parents were or how she came to be here. She meets an off-worlder named Tom, and she gets kind of pushed off a cliff, as it were, into his quest to find his brother who has been missing on her planet for a very long time. And as they go further and further into the wilds of the planet, Simsa starts to discover more about who she is. I believe this is the first book in a series. Character-wise, I had to get used to kind of a sparser writing style, and it definitely leans a little bit more into the sci-fi, but one of the things I will say about this is such an effortless blend of science fiction and fantasy together. It feels very much, the kind of atmosphere and storytelling feels very fantasy, but it has a lot of that sci-fi sparsity and directness, and obviously also the technology that is utilized in the book. I don't know that I would rush out to read the rest of the series, but I do think it gave me a good taste test of Andre Norton's work, and I do intend to read more of it. The one thing that I will say is probably my favorite part about this book is if you guys are looking for some amazing animal companions in your reading, these little guys right here are called Zorsals, and this one particularly is called Zas, and she is a mother Zorsal who has two adolescent baby Zorsals, not really babies, young adult Zorsals, who feature in this story, and they are precious. I found them very unique and inventive and fun and just wonderful little animal companions. They were probably my favorite part of this book. I loved them so much. So yeah, I've officially read some of Andre Norton's fantasy sci-fi now, and this was definitely a good pick for the Cosmic Footsteps Book Club, so I would definitely encourage anyone who's interested in taste testing her work. I do think that this has a lot going for it. Next up, I found a new favorite book. I read Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan, and I did do a dedicated review for this book, which you can watch. I'll put it up there. It was interesting reading this back to back with Master of the Void, because like I mentioned before, where Master of the Void had that more young adult kind of angst lens with which to view the world, and that kind of made the world feel a little bit smaller. This, to me, is a excellent example of a young protagonist group being thrown into a world that feels far too big for them, and really bringing those characters into the nitty-gritty of an adult world. I'm more picky about coming-of-age stories because they are one of my favorite tropes. It's young coming-of-age warrior school vibes. It is military fantasy. It was really checking all of the boxes for me. I absolutely loved this book. Thank you to everyone who's been pushing me to read it forever, because you were right, I love it so much. Valen Alsorna is a very young boy, like 10 or 11 years old, when he's dropped off at the gates of the Fortress of the Sixth Order, basically a sect of warrior monks who defend their faith through training to be elite warriors and killers. And Valen and his motley crew of fellow classmates of the year that he comes in grow together and try to continually prove that they are able to stay training in this order, because the weak are kind of filtered out. Valen is an incredible main character in this book. I oftentimes lean towards side characters as favorites in books like this, but I loved Valen. I found him to be a really compelling main character. I really liked the way that he interacted with the characters around him. It felt very natural. It was very interesting. And the motley crew that he's a part of, I absolutely loved. I did talk about this a little bit in my review. Once we get about halfway through the book, I did feel like the promises that I was given in the early part of the book in terms of the motley crew itself did kind of fade a little bit as they were split up, and it didn't feel as... the tone kind of changed, I guess. I still really loved the second half of this book. I liked the first half definitely the most, but I think that Anthony Ryan explores some amazing character work in this story, some really strong world building. One of the things that I look for and really enjoy in fantasy is when a religion is brought in that doesn't just feel like a thinly veiled replica of a religion that's readily accessible to us in our modern real world. And one of the things that I really found interesting about this is, at first I was getting kind of this, typical Western European vibe, but as the story went on, I realized that I was really acknowledging this religion within the story as just being very much its own thing, which I really appreciated. So yeah, I love this book. I thought it was amazing. It was definitely worth the read, and I'm so glad that I finally read it, because it was about time. Now I'm going to get to my DNF, and I think that this honestly might make a few people frustrated or mad at me. I'm sorry in advance. I genuinely just think that this was a book that I picked up at the wrong time. I don't know if I were to read it again in the future, pick it up in the future, if I would have a different experience with it, but I put it down for now because it was definitely, I was just not in the right headspace for this book. And that is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. Now, I have been meaning to read Octavia Butler for a long time, and I have heard such incredible, amazing things about her as a writer, and I still really am interested in reading her book, Kindred. I think what made me put this one down was I got about 3 to 4 chapters in, and it was a little bit too heavy real world for me, I think, and I do tend to, especially right now, I am really looking for secondary world experiences. It was more religiously philosophical than I'm looking for at this point, which is fine. It's not a problem with me or the book. It's just, it wasn't a good match at the time that I picked it up. So this was my Cosmic Footsteps book club pick for April, which I still would highly encourage anyone who is following along with that to read. I did post it in my community tab, so please feel free to pick this up because I would love to hear down in the comments if you guys have read it, what you thought of it. I just think for me, this was a not good timing to read this, but I still do intend to pick up Kindred at some point because I actually think that that one might be a better fit for me. And who knows, I might come back to this. I'm definitely very open to that. It was just a not right timing. All right, you guys. The last book on this list is a book that I am planning on doing a dedicated review for if I haven't done it already, because I have a lot to say, and I think that my experience with this book surprised me so much that I'm still working on articulating why I feel the way I feel about it. So in April, I picked up a book that I'd been kind of slowly working on for the last couple of months, and that was Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. Now, I've read the Farseer trilogy and really enjoyed it. I came into this series so excited, you guys, because everybody said, Tori, if you liked Farseer, you in particular are probably going to absolutely love live ships. And also, you're gonna hate Kyle, which seems to be like the one thing everybody says, which very astutely my friend Pete from Ponderings of Pete pointed out that that's one of the least spoilery things that people can tell you when you're going into this book, so that's kind of fair. But, and surprising no one, I did hate Kyle. But I have not struggled to get through a, like, very well-known fantasy book like this that much for quite a long time. And like I said, I'm still working on articulating my thoughts. I do intend to do a dedicated review. I don't know, you guys. Here's the thing. My objective and subjective opinions of this book could not be farther from each other, and I think that's why I'm having such a hard time articulating this, because objectively, Robin Hobb is a brilliant writer. She's a brilliant writer. I love the concept of the live ships. I love her world building, the concept of the serpents, and the kind of subtle mystery magic system running through these stories. I love that. She is incredibly strong at building believable characters. And that's, like, none of that is disputable on my end. That being said, the subjective side of me, man, I had a hard time with this book. I got to the end of it and I was really pushing myself to finish the book. I did not like any of the characters, and I know there's going to be the people in the comments that are like, well, that's the point. I get that. Like, I understand that these are not necessarily meant to be your typical heroic, likable characters. And I love so many books that have characters who are going through things, who have character arcs, who are struggling, who have lots of crap thrown at them. That's not new to me at all. It kind of became a cycle of, and then the next terrible, awful thing happens. And then on the next page, the next terrible, awful thing happens. And it just kind of started to just feel like, I don't want to say, like, misery, because I feel like that's harsh. But to me personally, it started to feel like that, where I was just waiting for the next terrible, awful thing to happen, and then when it did it, I was like, yep, oh, of course it did. And then it rained. You know, like, it just got to the point where my emotional investment was so burned out, probably halfway into this book, that I just didn't, when things would happen, I wasn't responding with anything except for frustration after a while. No one is more surprised by my reaction to this book than I am, I promise you. I still am trying to figure out what happened. I loved Paragon. So there's that. But yeah, I think I'm going to save most of my other thoughts for my dedicated review for this book, because I do want to go deeper into this, and I do intend to continue the series. And I know, like I said, objectively, I know that Robin Hobb is setting us up for some insane payoffs. I'm aware of that. But at this point, I just don't know that I feel like I want to continue to get to them. You know what I mean? I've had lots of conversations about this book with some of my friends who are big fans of it, and I'm still in conversation with them, like desperately trying to figure out what happened. If you guys are fans of Live Ship Traders, feel free to let me know down in the comments. I absolutely love that for you. At this point, I'm not a believer, which surprises me more than anybody else. But we'll see if and when I continue the series. I hope that changes. I am definitely open for that to change. I will be taking a break from this series because I needed one. But anyways, that was my month of reading. It was kind of varied, and like I said, it's teaching me a lot about myself as a reader, especially Ship of Magic, and also with Bloodsong and Master of the Void, and trying to articulate what works and doesn't work for me as somebody who loves coming of age tropes. So there was a lot of introspection, I think, that happened this month, which I'm never mad about. And yeah, I hope that you guys also had some amazing reads this month and learned lots about yourselves, and I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. So I hope you're all having 5-star reads. I hope that you're having a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.